Welcome to the channel, viewers. Dr. JWA, theologist since 1994. We're still looking at Tickle versus Giggle, behavioural-constitutional analysis, episode 2, when language stopped meaning what people thought it meant. The fluorescent carriage hums through the underground tunnel while exhausted passengers stare silently into glowing screens. Nobody speaks loudly anymore. Nobody risks unnecessary conversation. The country still outwardly functions, but something psychologically heavier has entered ordinary Australian life. People increasingly feel required to monitor not merely what they say, but what they are permitted to perceive. And that is where the Tickle versus Giggle ruling becomes far larger than one legal dispute. The verdict exposed a deeper constitutional civilisational fracture. Institutional systems increasingly asserting authority to reconstruct foundational human definitions, while simultaneously conditioning the population to behaviourally adapt around those reconstructed meanings. Woman, sex, identity, protection, rights. The words remain publicly visible, but increasingly ordinary Australians no longer fully understand whether the meanings underneath those words still possess stable constitutional boundaries. And that uncertainty changes human behaviour. The office worker pauses before answering a harmless question. A teacher rehearses terminology internally before speaking aloud. The tradie scrolls headlines during smoko while instinctively deciding which opinions are no longer professionally survivable. And not because police armed police entered the workplace, but because institutional systems no longer need overt force once populations begin psychologically self-regulating beneath reputational threat. And that is the authoritarian transition most people fail to recognize while living through it. The Tickle versus Giggle reasoning revealed something profoundly destabilizing. Institutional authority increasingly reserving power to reinterpret observable human categories through administrative and judicial expansion, while simultaneously expecting public compliance with the resulting semantic reconstruction. And that creates a catastrophic psychological burden upon society itself, because human beings cannot indefinitely function inside permanently unstable reality structures without nervous system consequence. Once people begin speaking against perception, suppressing observable recognition, ritualizing institutional terminology for safety, and publicly performing meanings that they no longer privately fully believe, the population slowly fragments internally. Trust deteriorates, speech becomes procedural, conversation becomes calculated, public behaviour separates from private recognition, and citizens increasingly learn institutional survival now depends less upon truthful clarity and more upon demonstrating ritual compliance with administratively approved perception. And that is where constitutional destabilization becomes existential, because the law no longer merely governs conduct, it progressively governs permissible interpretation of reality itself. The cafe still opens beneath the morning rain. The trains still arrive beneath fluorescent light. And Parliament still sits beneath the flag. But underneath the ordinary continuity, another atmosphere quietly expands across the country. Psychological adaptation to institutional unreality. And that is why the case feels emotionally larger than legal procedure alone. Australians instinctively sense the issue is no longer merely disagreement about policy. The issue is whether institutional systems have begun crossing civilisational limits. Previous generations assumed law was never morally permitted to cross, because constitutional inheritance originally assumed reality preceded administration, law recognised limits, language remained anchored to observable continuity, and human authority operated beneath restraints it did not possess power to redefine. But once institutions progressively claim authority to reconstruct foundational categories, while socially penalising non-participation in those reconstructions, constitutional order slowly mutates into behavioural management infrastructure instead. The carriage doors close again. Another government announcement echoes mechanically through the fluorescent silence, and passengers remain absorbed inside illuminated scenes while the nation outwardly continues functioning normally. Yet beneath the procedural continuity, another reality steadily grows. The population is increasingly being conditioned to adapt psychologically, behaviourally, and linguistically around institutional meanings many no longer feel fully permitted to question openly. And once a civilization begins fearing honest recognition more than managed unreality, I'll say that again, more than managed unreality, constitutional destabilization has already advanced far beyond politics alone. It has entered the psychological structure of national life itself.